So how did you manage to get care when there wasn't an NHS to help you?
Well, very often you had to care for yourself, and you got over-the-counter remedies. You used to go to the chemist and he would sometimes make things up for you, or you would treat them like you've always treated them, with homemade remedies, such as if you had a sore throat, you had honey and lemon. If you had a bad stomach, you had egg, milk and brandy. So we used to do that quite often. Otherwise, if you needed a doctor, you had to pay for him. And it was called being on the panel, because there was a panel of doctors and you chose one that you wanted and he would be your doctor. But you had to pay him. Sometimes in rural areas they paid in kind with eggs or milk or honey. But mostly you had to save up to pay for the doctor's visit. And usually he did visit you. It's not very often that you visited him, because you were usually really poorly. I remember one time when my sister was very poorly with an abscess in her ear. It was called a mastoid, and she was really in an awful lot of pain. And the doctor said he couldn't do anything, but he thought the surgeon ought to come and just release the abscess in her ear. So we couldn't afford it at the time, but my grandparents paid for the surgeon to come to the house to perform the operation. So we had to clear the dining room table and put on freshly cleaned and ironed sheets and place my sister on it. And the surgeon came to do the operation on the dining room table, but much to her relief, the abscess burst just before he came, so he didn't have to perform the operation. But it was an interesting thing to do at the time, and I was fascinated by what was going on, but very relieved that my poor sister didn't have to be operated on. There were a lot of childhood illnesses before the NHS which were not curable, and a lot of children died as a result of common things which we take for granted now, like measles, whooping cough, diphtheria, scarlet fever, all things which now can be helped with antibiotics, which were not available at the time. So children were nursed at home, and the worst one was polio, because the vaccinations for polio didn't come in until the 1950s, and it was really difficult. As a child, you were not allowed to go swimming in rivers and sometimes even in swimming baths because of the risk of catching polio, which could kill you or maim you for life. I remember children being put into iron lungs because the polio had damaged the nerves to their lungs and they couldn't breathe. And then it often went into your bones and stopped you from walking properly. And there are still people about today who have damage done to them by the disease polio. So it was a very difficult time when you were ill as a child. And I had quite severe pneumonia with measles, and the tablet that they gave us then was called M&B. It was made by a company called Mitchell and Butler, which is why it was called M&B. And it wasn't an antibiotic, but it did do the trick at the time. But it was a very serious illness. Measles was very serious, as was diphtheria. And a lot of children died because of it. So we're very grateful now to have the NHS and the vaccination and immunisation programmes, which stop all this dreadful disease from happening. I think the NHS is wonderful. We seem to forget all the horrible things that used to happen before we had the NHS, and I'm just so grateful that we've got good care all through our lives. It makes such a difference to people today that we haven't got the awful illnesses that we used to have, and that we have very good, highly qualified staff, we have excellent medication, and we're all living longer and feeling better because of it. So I am very proud to have been part of the NHS, and long may it continue.